Fun fact, on Orlando is right after this place.
Oh, really?
Yay!
That's nice.
Yeah, you get to experience on Orlando.
And it's all this
It's just as
misery.
ass as it was in the other game.
Yeah, because it was an illusion, and
Alright, Dan, let's rock and roll!
This review is coming a little late and I'm congested, so there's two negatives adding on to this video. Maybe not doing too well right off rip, but it is what it is. In contrast to a lot of my other videos, I'm actually going to start with the spoiler-free section just because the game is that new. I know you could say that I didn't do that for Resident Evil 8 and that game, or that video came out even sooner than this one did in comparison to when the games came out respectively. And I don't have a rebuttal to that, is, you know, eh. Anyway, though, the game was a surprising new entry in the mainline series. I was under the impression it was going to be a sequel to the reboot, and for a bit of the beginning I was under that impression still, until I saw on Twitter and saw someone say that it's actually from the mainline series, and I fact-checked that. I don't know if I fact-checked it correctly, but that's a story for another day. There are a few missteps with Clank in my opinion, and sometimes it does feel like Ratchet is being sidelined in favor of Rivet, which will either be a positive if you really like Rivet, or a negative if you're not that much of a fan of her. I really like Rivet, so I wasn't that bothered by it, but I do miss old Ratchet, so it was a double-edged sword. I know I said the game handles the lore really well, and I meant that in the sense that it builds upon the lore pretty good without actually forcing you to play every fucking game in the series, because there's like 9 or a million or something. There's like main line games and like sideline games. That's not the point. Anyway, it does well enough where you don't have to actually play the older games in order to know what the fuck's going on. All you really need to play is a crack in time and you'll be fine. Maybe Tools of Destruction, but just play a crack in time and you'll be perfectly fine knowing exactly what's going on. The combat and gunplay feels different from older games with the added mobility, and I personally like that because when I play games like this, I'm more of a move around, skate around type of player. I like to move around a lot. I don't like standing around, so that kind of really worked for me, but I can see why some people wouldn't like it. I just wouldn't understand why you wouldn't like it, if that makes any sense. Because you can really mix around your playstyle when you include the rocket boots and the dash and the rift jumping, and some of the newer weapons also kind of play into that. And although some of the newer weapons don't really hit the same as the older ones do, and particularly the Rhino, but I'll save that for spoiler section, the combat is still fun because the movement carries it, as long as you take off adaptive triggers, because that shit is raw poo-poo. I played on the hardest difficulty and found myself getting stumped through some of the levels, so it's not like the easiest fucking game in the world, but it also isn't the hardest as long as you like look where you're fucking shooting. And actually like strategize or some shit about where you want to put yourself, which I don't, because I mentioned I just like running around really fast. So I'm not saying it's a hard game, but it's also not the easiest game depending on how you actually play it. Now obviously this isn't an RPG where you can make like a billion fucking builds, but what I'm trying to say is that it's nice to not be stuck in the cycle of strafe, shoot, jump, strafe, shoot. In older games, your playstyle options are pretty much started and finished with picking your preferred weapons, and then you just had to go through the movement cycle I just mentioned. You don't have to actually utilize this new mobility. I don't know why you fucking wouldn't, but you don't have to, and it's possible to get through every single level in the traditional game style. I tried it myself and didn't get too severely punished, save for like an extra few deaths or whatever on a certain level. But this creates an entirely new problem in this game where Clank isn't really that important. At least while you're like traversing the world and in combat. Obviously he's important in the story, he has to be, he's like the second main character. Just like how every anime has the bath scene, every Ratchet and Clank game has the scene where you lose Clank. A crack in time even starts with you not having Clank in the beginning at all. Here, when you lose Clank, it doesn't fucking matter at all. You probably won't even really notice, aside from lacking in Clank dialogue and Ratchet continuously saying, I gotta find Clank, or your missions revolving around finding Clank. Now don't get me wrong, this isn't even this game's fault alone. This has been a thing that's been starting since the beginning of the Future series, and it probably was coming even before the Future series, like it's probably started in the other mainline games. So this is more of just a serious complaint for me than really just on this game, and I'll go more into that in the spoiler section. When it comes to the planets we're blowing shit up in this game, they're a lot livelier than they were in the remake, but that's not really saying much, to be honest. And the planets where we get to actually see the alternate versions of those planets are probably the highest point of like setting in this game. I was actually getting worried towards the middle that we weren't gonna get a decent planet number, because unlike in older games where every time we go to one planet we get 2 more planets and both those planets give us shit, this happens here, but not really towards the beginning, more towards the end game when that happens. So I was a little bit worried we weren't gonna get a good fat planet chunk, but we did get what I would say is a nice healthy amount of planet content in the game. The level design was also a lot different from previous games. I don't know if anyone else will really see what I mean by how different, but for me it felt a little different because they feel a lot more open and not really held down by the 2 or 3 paths that lead to different quests. because this time around they switched it up where each planet has multiple quests that you follow through the area, and sometimes the planet opens up a lot more when you come back with different items. Obviously that happened before, but here they do it a little differently where it doesn't just open up the end to a path, it opens up the entire planet completely a lot more, so you can traverse it even more and you can acquire other tools and shit like that. But I think the cost of that is that there's not that many side quests in the game. I only counted like 2 or 3, not counting the collectibles because those aren't side quests. I'm not saying side quests in Ratchet and Clank games have always been God's gift to fucking Earth, but I did like doing them because I did like spending time in these worlds, so it kind of did suck that we didn't get that many to do. The faster movement potential probably also adds to why the levels are as big as they are or as wide as they are. It would have definitely sucked if we had more linear, smaller levels and we could have moved this fast. It would have just felt not boring, but like tedious to not be able to go as fast as you can. The puzzles were fine. Clank areas are always a hit or miss for everyone who plays them. Some people love them, some people hate them, some people are mixed about them, but these are good for what they actually tried to attempt. They're similar to a Crack in Time puzzle. Sorry for mentioning that game so much, but it's the last mainline entry in the series. We don't count Into the Nexus, so it would be natural that I compare it to that, obviously, for anyone that actually gave a fuck to complain about that for whatever reason. But anyway, similar to our Crack in Time puzzles where instead of the time element, we use orbs that have different effects, like heavy, lifting, speed, electricity. Like I said, they're fine, but they seem to lack a little personality to them aside from the guy that's going to be talking you through these puzzles. I much preferred the way they did it in A Crack in Time where it really played with the idea of time. I would have liked it if they incorporated riffs more into these puzzles. They try to by telling you, it's a spoiler, but they tell you where you're doing these puzzles. So that's like their attempt to connect it and give it like its own gimmick, but I don't think it works as well as they wanted it to. They're still fun and some of them are a little hard, but they just don't hit the same. The bonuses we get for collecting gold bolts and infobots were probably some of the best we've had in the series in my opinion. I love the weapon skin thing we can do. I love the graphic style changes from noir to retro to pixelated and shit like that. The infinite ammo and health options were fun to use if you just really wanted to blast through an area, and the added options of finding armor pieces and having them have different stats. They didn't really feel like they did anything, to be honest, because of how the skills were set. I think if you're just using the Raritanium one or the Experience one, you'll pretty much get everything out of the armor pieces as you can, because I think those are the only ones that actually have something worth using consistently. And the lore we get from the Lombax stuff and the infobots really does add like some breath of fresh air to the series, because I've been really wanting some Ratchet and Clank lore. We always get some in games, but it might just be because I haven't gotten any in a while, but it really did make the game feel more alive when I was going through those infobots. All that felt really rewarding, but to be honest, I kind of do wish we had skill points back. Not that I ever actually did them, but it was nice to see that I got one from time to time from just doing random shit. I've seen some people also complain that it's too easy to find all the collectibles, or that there weren't enough. That's a valid argument, but I'd counter that by saying that as soon as you collect a gadget in every game to find every collectible, it becomes easy regardless. It just changes from how long it takes you to get it, which is exactly what happens here, but to each their own, I guess. Nothing wrong with being wrong. I'm not gonna lie, I really don't give a fuck about graphics or FPS, but if you care, the game looks really good. Almost too good, to be honest. I don't need to see how fluffy and fuzzy Ratchet is, but it's cool if you're into that for reasons. It just wasn't something I've been craving in my Ratchet and Clank games. My game never really crashed at all, and I could never really sense any lag or anything like that, and the transitions from level to level with very little loading screen was actually really impressive. Overall, the game is a fun time blowing up random aliens if you don't really give a fuck about the story, and if you do, then I don't think you'll be too unhappy with the direction the story is heading and what it's setting up for a sequel that might actually be the best game in the series if it's handled well. Because for people to take anything away from a review, it has to be given a number. I'm gonna give the game a 9 out of 10. Despite the pieces of the story I'm gonna tear into in the spoiler section, I did have a really fun time, and I got to relive one of the best series from my childhood, second only to Sly Cooper. Spoiler-free section is done. Get the fuck out if you haven't played the game, because we're about to spoil shit.
Hard.
I went over generally what I liked about the gameplay, and it still stands here. Gunplay is fluid, and using the dash and the rocket boots mid-combat can make you feel pretty badass as you're zipping and zooming around and dropping nades on aliens and shit. And the sound effect for the boots really tickled my nipples because it reminds me of the sound of Sanji Skywalk. But before we touch on anything else, I promised we were going to talk about Clank, so we're going to talk about Clank. Now don't get me wrong, I really like Clank as a character, and I think a lot of people really downplay the amount of development he's gotten from the start of the series up until now, but that could be its own video for a whole ass other day. As soon as we lost Clank in this game, my first thought was, fuck, the game is going to start hard then, because I assumed it would actually matter. In older games, when you lost or didn't have Clank, you felt it. You couldn't glide, so your jumps felt riskier, you couldn't long jump, so your timing had to be tighter to make it to any platform, and in combat, you couldn't even evade attack because you couldn't do any of the things I just said. And you couldn't even high jump or rocket pound when that was actually a thing. So getting to high places was harder, and some rare attacks were almost undodgeable. Now, did all these super risky situations always show up in the older games? Fuck no. But the point is, losing Clank felt not only harmful to the story, but how you played the damn game. Losing Clank in this game doesn't really mean shit as soon as you get the rocket boots, and it doesn't even take that long to get them, to be honest. You get them at Savale, I'm pretty sure. And even without the boots, you could just supplement the long jumps and the needed platforming for the dash. They even took crouching out completely from this game, so you can't even high jump or long jump anyway, even if you really wanted to. Now, for a moment, I was actually fine with this, because logically, as they become better heroes, they will get better equipment and nullify the original uses of Clank. That makes sense. However, Ratchet isn't the only character who should be improving their fucking gear. Clank in the first game got two big upgrades. The propellers, which became his mainstay and the one he uses constantly, and the rocket, which he never fucking uses anymore. Throughout the games, he always gets upgrades and shit to him, but nothing that actually stays and is used consistently throughout the series. The closest we got to an actual potential thing that could have been Clank's new gadget that he uses consistently was the Time Scepter, and they even took that shit away from him. The point I'm trying to make is that upgrades for Clank have always been lacking. They've always kind of shafted Clank, and it hasn't become noticeable until recently, when you start actually realizing that he's becoming less and less useful in not only combat, which isn't even his main thing, so I would understand that, but just in general when you're moving around and traversing the world. It really sucks for us to have gotten to a point where he can be replaced with Kit, and there's pretty much no change at all to gameplay at all aside from dialogue. In my perfect version of this game, when you have Kit and Clank, your gameplay would be affected drastically. Kit is a full-ass warbot, unlike Clank, so maybe Kit can assist in a more defensive style of play. You could bring out a shield to block damage or something, some shit like that. I really don't know what you could give them for this change, but give me like a month and I swear I could probably think of something. My point being, Clank and Kit shouldn't feel like getting a new backpack after summer break. There should be something else there. The complaint of mishandling characters also kind of falls onto Ratchet, just not as much. If Insomniac hadn't actually came out and said that this was another entry in the mainline series, I wouldn't have been able to figure it the fuck out otherwise, because I really did think that for the first 3 planets. I'm not saying it wasn't cool to get another mainline series game, but it also made me feel a little different about the Ratchet we get here because he didn't actually seem like mainline series Ratchet. He seems more in line with reboot Ratchet. I understand that as we got deeper into the mainline games, Ratchet obviously changed as a character and wasn't this asshole-less douchebag anymore. He had changed and become a more heroic person, which is natural, but he's still a snarky dickhead in every game. He wasn't a huge cockhead by the end of the first game, and the type of Ratchet they're trying to portray in this game, we literally got in the second game. We already got this character arc. The start of the second game is Ratchet in an interview talking about how no one really needs a hero anymore and they haven't actually done anything. We have already had an arc of washed up Ratchet trying to get back into being a hero. One of the laws about storytelling I learned in school is that if you're going to repeat an arc for a character, it has to be even better than it was the first time, because if it isn't as good, it's just redundant. And in Rift Apart, it wasn't done any better than it was in the second game. I get that there can't always be hero shit for Ratchet to be doing, and in Rift Apart he hadn't actually done anything since Into the Nexus, but I reiterate my point that we've already seen this before, so they could have just did something different. He just doesn't really carry the same vibe that Ratchet used to, and a better character arc for him could have been him returning and actually being confident that he can return to his former glory. It just really feels like we're getting reboot Ratchet in a mainline story game. This is why I said earlier that if you like Rivet, then you won't be too bothered by Ratchet almost being sidelined in his own game, which I wouldn't have even probably minded if he was just more of a solid character and not whatever the hell we got here. Despite all that though, Rivet is actually a really good character who gets somewhat of a character arc and room to develop, even if it feels a little rushed towards the end. This is obviously a Rivet focused game, which makes a lot of sense considering we are in her dimension. I just wish Ratchet did a little more in the final battle, especially considering he doesn't really get a 1v1 with Nefarious aside from the beginning, which is the beginning, so it doesn't even really count as anything. Jumping straight to the final battle though, I don't know if anyone else got endgame vibes from it, but I think aside from A Crack in Time, this was the best finale we've gotten to a Ratchet & Clank game. Alt Nefarious invading and launching a full-scale attack went apeshit, and it really felt like we needed everything we could get to fight off this dude. I was waiting forever to get Alt Nefarious in the game. As soon as he's name dropped dropped at the very start, and when he is on screen, he just has a crazy presence to him. Especially considering at no point does he feel weak or like we could just kick his ass as soon as we get the chance to get our hands on him like normal Nefarious does. And the one time his character is actually weak is when he's not happy he just conquered a whole ass universe and wants to conquer more. Like, it made him that scary that he was sad he couldn't conquer even more, or that he didn't feel fulfilled just conquering what he already had. He at no point really feels fully beatable, and I would have loved it if what happened to Rivet's dimension happened to ours and we were just defeated at the end of the first game, and the second game was going to be us trying to find a way to collect our resources and fight him all over again. And a game picking up like that could have also played into a different character arc for Ratchet, where he has to deal with the fact that he did take the fattest L of his entire career right now. That being said, I'm still excited for the potential of seeing the Lombaxes in a sequel. I feel like we've been owed that for the longest, and it is a little weird how Azimuth wasn't mentioned at all, by the way, especially when Ratchet is looking through the Lombax messages, not even a name drop or anything. Regarding that too, it really makes you wonder what the real origin of them is, and Ratchet included, because these messages were left in Rivet's dimension, implying that it is the original dimension they come from. The person who records them mentions Ratchet's father Caden, so we can also assume that Ratchet originates from Rivet's dimension and somehow got to Veldin in his own dimension. But that contradicts with the idea of Rivet being Ratchet's counterpart in this dimension. I don't know if that's a plot hole or set up for a twist or something, but if Ratchet and Rivet are counterparts and don't have the same name, I don't know why Rivet's dad, who would be alternate Caden, also be called Caden. What I'm basically trying to say is, why is Caden's name being mentioned in a universe where he doesn't exist? I don't have any real gripes with the raw story, to be honest, aside from our original duo being sidelined. Everything else was pretty solid, but the conflict between Rivet and Kit didn't really do it for me. I was hyped to see how it would go when she revealed her backstory, because this made me think that we're gonna get a different version of Clank's backstory, where instead of him escaping from the factory, he actually became a warbot and had to deal with those consequences. So I was actually really excited to see how that would go. And then also considering how Rivet feels about robots, considering how she lost her arm, it was nice setup for some real drama to begin. And it didn't really. Rivet was obviously mad, but there wasn't really an argument or anything like that. She has a few lines about it, Clank talks to her about it, and then so does Ratchet kind of talk about it. But I felt like the real meat of the issue would happen between Kit and Rivet, and it doesn't. When Rivet approaches Kit at the end of the prison, I was expecting that to be where they have their conversation about it, because that's the logical thing you would do. I understand that, you know, there's more at stake happening right now, but they still do need to talk about it, obviously. And a bigger sign that they need to talk about it is the fact that Rivet gets mad that Kit isn't joining them to fight Nefarious, and is even angry with her about that, it seems. And then after that they leave her there. And that moment where they leave Kit back at the prison could have been something even more emotional if they just tweaked that argument a bit, even a little bit, to make it actually feel something like actual humans would talk about. Not that they're humans, but you get my point. It feels like there was so much lost potential in that moment. Another lost opportunity was the tension between Rivet and Ratchet about finding the Lombaxes. For a while, Ratchet has been flip-floppy about it, and there's no one else who could actually talk to him about it aside from Rivet, the only other Lombax. And I don't know if Insomniac completely forgot that Ratchet also already went through this arc before in a game. There were 2 games in the series dealing with this arc. And if anyone doesn't remember, the conclusion of this arc is him deciding he doesn't want to go find the Lombaxes because he has more in this dimension with Clank, Quark, and Talwyn, who's never mentioned at all in the game either. It's like she just never existed. And that's primarily why I didn't even think this was a mainline game in the series, because main shit isn't mentioned or is just removed from the canon. Going back to this lost opportunity though, Rivet and Ratchet don't really talk about anything. They just apologize and laugh about how similar they are, which is such a fucking waste. Like, it was cute, I guess, but it was just disappointing. Leaning more back into the disappointing range, I'm sad we didn't get to see Lawrence at all. I'm actually really surprised he just doesn't appear. I don't know if there's a reason he's not here. I completely forgot what happened to Lawrence, if I'm being completely honest with you. I just really miss Lawrence. And that's mostly because we miss out on the best gag involving Nefarious, where he just fucking breaks down and has to be fixed. I missed that a lot. And I wish we got a little more Quark, because I love seeing our resident green rat. This isn't an actual real complaint, but I do wish we had a swim level or something. It's a rare for me to actually want a water level because they typically suck desecrated horsecock, but Ratchet games handle them very well usually. entirely, or maybe I just want a recreation of the timed water level in the first game. Who knows? Either way, I still want it back. And no, before you say it, the level where you're in the underwater base does not count. The small water portion in that level is poopy anyway. And some minigames would have been cool to have too. I never knew how much I actually missed the hoverboard levels and the races, but I really do want them back. But the glitch levels are a good enough fix of minigames. I swear to God, I loved playing as Glitch. I don't know who the fuck in Insomniac came up with the idea of her character, but give that man, or woman, we don't judge, a trophy, a Grammy, or an MTV award, something. Those levels aren't only fun as shit, but she is such a colorful character to add to the series, and I'm praying to the Fortnite gods that she comes back in the next game. If they don't bring her back in the next game, I swear on my third nut, this game is dropping from a 9 out of 10 to a 3 out of 10. Maybe even a 0 out of 10. It is a literal hate crime to not put Glitch in the next game. We're getting a little too dick sucky here, so let's throw in another negative to spice it up. The Rhino fucking sucks. We've had bad rhinos before, like these disgusting mistakes, and we've had godly rhinos, like these absolutely based men. And now we have whatever the actual fuck this dirty slice of shit pie is supposed to be. Just to make this rant more valid, I leveled this bastard up to max, wasted my Raritanium on all its skills, and on top of it, turned on infinite ammo to really test how good it can be. This shit doesn't even do continuous damage. I killed the bosses in the final arena round faster with a maxed out rocket launcher. I don't know if the weapon comes pre-nerf, but you have to wait until the monster loses that purple glow shit to attack again, and the damage isn't even worth the shitty fire rate. Like I said, the rocket launcher does better damage and faster. And I can already hear you now. But Gizmo, you're supposed to use it on hordes of enemies, not boss. It has such great AoE potential. It's easily the best crowd control weapon in the game. First of all, the best AoE weapon is the sprinkler. Second of all, fuck you. The Rhino has always been an endgame weapon that you can either use to run a train on every enemy in New Game Plus, or spread the humble ass cheeks of the final boss who did not come into work that day expecting to be violated by 500 rockets in the span of 5 seconds. The Sly Cooper Easter egg was cool, but would I trade that for a better Rhino? No. And to add salt, lemon, and a hint of paprika to the wound, where's the fucking song? You mean to tell me they couldn't even give this shitty Rhino a song? Speaking of Easter eggs though, the mentions of Jack and Sly did bring a smile to my face. I know it doesn't mean more games in the respective series, but a boy can certainly dream. Clearly not about a better Rhino though, but whatever. Scrambling all the way back to the weapons for a minute, the blaster pistol, mushroom gun, ricochet gun, pixelizer, and that gun that shoots energy beams, I can remember what the fuck it was called, they weren't really the best. Let's admit it, they're lacking. I really did try to give every weapon a fair chance and made the game a lot harder on myself by trying to get each one to level 5, even if it meant struggling on the easiest of levels and letting those enemies run a train on my tiny little asshole. These weapons, in my opinion, didn't do enough damage to be useful or were held back by their own shitty gimmicks. The blasters do barely enough damage to stop a thug for hire who's standing still and picking his asshole. The pixelizer feels like you're shooting them with a whipped cream gun. Shit might as well be buffing them with how long it takes to actually kill them. The mushroom gun is admittedly fine, but the death from above does more damage, and you can actually summon 2 of them at a time, unlike the mushroom gun. But again, I admit the fountain is better than both of those because they just freeze them in place and you can hit multiple enemies at once. So the only thing keeping me from putting the death from above on the shit list is that you can just summon more than one, so you can at least try to make it do some damage. The Ricochet gun is one of those guns that only works on the small enemies like the sand sharks or those weird rock things in the lava area. They only work on them because they die in one hit, and that's when they're only useful in shit crowd control, when you have no other ammo. When you use it against actual enemies who are trying, you have to just spam it, and even then, it's not even worth it with how many times you have to click per ricochet. The gimmick is stupid and annoying, especially if you have adaptive triggers on. That beam weapon, I cannot fucking remember its name, but that beam weapon was actually godly in the beginning of the game. I was spamming it all the time, and I'd say it's actually good until mid-game, especially considering how it just fucking wipes bosses and how fast it can level up when you just shoot it at a fucking horde. But by mid-game, your other weapons are strong enough to out-damage it, and then bosses start to eat its damage like Golden Corral biscuits. For some closing thoughts that aren't worth the whole ass segment, if you can even call my rambling segments, Mrs. Zircon was cool, Zircon Jr. was cringe and then funny and then cringe again, Clank losing his arm was stupid. Oh yeah, Clank lost his arm, that was fucking stupid. I know we're at the final stretch, but we're gonna ramble a bit more before the end. Why the fuck didn't someone fix Clank's arm? Like, I get the metaphor that we got in the Fixers level, which was an incredible action sequence by the way, but do we really need to just leave Clank armless? And to put sprinkles on this belly button cheese pie, we already had this character arc for Clank Clank before. What is the literal point in having him lose an arm just to accept himself as he is, when in the first game, his entire character revolved around accepting himself for who he was because he is a defect? Why? And if this hand-fisted message was something we really did need in this game, why not just have Ratchet lose the arm? I'd be fine with that. Like, if he lost it in the story, fine. But Clank, a fucking robot, is just gonna stay armless? I don't really get why. Like, you can very easily fix this problem. It's not like Rivet, who has to construct some robot arm and it loses the human aspects of it. Just have Ratchet build a new one for Clank. I don't know. I thought that shit was dumb, and it got annoying towards the end when he just didn't have a fucking arm. Especially when you see him glide with the propellers. Cause now it's just breaking logic, because you would be flying in circles. I'm being reminded right now that I forgot to talk in depth about the levels. I actually really liked each planet and how either Ratchet or Rivet would be in each planet and you would switch between them. And the transitions from each one were actually done really well. It was on some high fantasy shit where you're switching perspectives from characters and getting different plot lines and storylines, and I think they did that really, really well. It really added a sense of scale to our story, and it just felt bigger and the stakes felt higher. Like, the stakes are always high, but I commend Insomniac for how they handled the switching of characters, because it just gave you that sense that this universe is big and we're just traveling through all of it trying to save it. It would have fucking sucked if the story was just Ratchet chasing down Rivet to every planet she just visited, and then him having his own little alternate story there. That would have been a little boring and kind of a cheap way to go about it. Like, I wouldn't have hated that, but it wouldn't have been as engaging and probably would have made me tired of the scenery a lot faster because it's being overused twice. Like, I'm not going back to explore for fun, I'm there for a story that could have been happening somewhere else. So good on Insomniac for really finding a good middle ground to handle that. See, the way they did it in this game now makes me wish we could go to each planet with different characters. It's done that well. It makes me want something I didn't want. Blizzard Prime was fun as hell to explore, but when revisiting it, it's a little annoying to traverse. And Cordelian is the same, but it's a little funner to explore afterwards as long as you figure out how to get around the damn place. I'm gonna pronounce all this shit wrong, but Savale, Visceron, and Ardolis are the obvious high tiers. I can't rank how much I love them. I think the prison is my favorite, but that'll change by the time you ask me again. Torn is good too, but I see it more as an action level than an actual exploration level, which isn't bad. That's just what keeps it from being up there with those three. And to cap it all off, the reveal that the plumber is some rift manager was funny as hell, and I'm glad they didn't milk that to shit and make him like the final boss or some shit like that. It was good potential setup for something later on if they want to make it more than what it is, or just keep it as a gag. Either way, I think I'm here for it. Like I said in the spoiler-free section, this game is a 9 out of 10 for me, even if it did disappoint me in a lot of different ways. I say a lot, but like when you look back at it, it's not that many ways it disappointed me. It's just ways that really did bug me a lot. And despite that, I'm gonna keep it at a 9 out of 10 because I loved playing it. Like, regardless of anything, I loved playing it and the core story was still good. I would probably describe it as like my favorite disappointment or something, which actually is a pretty sick name. I might make that the title of the video. That's about it though. See ya.